Guardians, despite being at home in the land, were a home underdog against Tarek Skubal. Enter Lane Thomas, maybe one of the under-the-radar trade deadline acquisitions being dealt from the Nationals. He was huge in the ALDS.
A heavy favorite for the New York Yankees in the series. You're going to look to their best two ball players to be those MVPs. That's Juan Soto and it's Aaron Judge.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
That kid on the two-point conversion play was wide open on the right side of the end zone, and the kid threw it about 15 rows over his head.
People crystallized Georgia and Alabama. They put them on the shelf above everyone else, and they're just not there this year. I thought the kid Beck was great on Saturday, but they barely beat Mississippi State, who is porous.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
College football today. It is time for the post-game show here on SportsGrid TV. And while you're used to seeing me, Kasey Hudson and Dubs Anderson, tonight it's Kasey Hudson with Rich Cirminello going to run through this Saturday college football slate. And it was nothing close to boring, but we kind of already anticipated that. A number of large games circled on the calendar, big matchups, big showdowns, big upsets, and obviously some winners coming out on top here. So first and foremost, Rich, how are you? How's it going this evening? How was your Saturday with all of this madness going on?
Kasey, it's you and I talking college football in Week 8. What could possibly be better? Another great Saturday in college football. I cherish every one of these weekends. I know in another month and a half, the regular season is going to be over. It goes by so quickly. And yeah, it was another great weekend of football. I mean, we're seeing a lot of teams that were not accustomed to being undefeated continuing to win. Indiana, BYU, Army and Navy, Iowa State. I'm trying to watch out of the corner of my eye as they look to rally against UCF, number 9 Cyclones, and stay undefeated. So great season, great weekend, and look forward to breaking it down with you over the next hour.
Yes, I'm very excited. There's so many games that I just cannot wait to pick your brain on, for one. And for two, it just continues to shock me that it's already so close to November 30th. I just don't understand when we got here. I know the guys have been warning me that it's already close to winter here. Winter for me, the native Floridian. But I'm just like, where is the time going? But it's blessing us with great football, and today was none the less. Now, typically I like to start at the top and go over some of those noon games, over those big scores that are already in the books. But I feel like I'd be remiss not to talk about the current game going on right now, because it's been such a wild game between Georgia and Texas. I mean, heading into this matchup, everyone thought it was going to be probably within 3. We didn't particularly assume that it was going to be this massive outscoring one or the other, because we know that there's good defenses on both sides. First half of this game, all Georgia. It looked like Georgia was going to put Texas away and call it a night, but then Texas rallied. They came back. They decided to put Quinn Ewers back in after removing him and replacing him with Arch Manning in that second quarter there. While the score might not show that Texas has a chance, it's 30-15 Texas with the ball right now, and 9:27 left in football is a lot of game left. So what have you made of this matchup from what the expectation was to what the result currently is?
Hey, great football game. Another great matchup. We had Oregon, Ohio State last week, Georgia, Alabama a few weeks back. We've had some mega tilts in college football. This one is no different. Little disappointed in Texas and Quinn Ewers. There was some rust last week, which you expected after he missed a month of football. But by game 2, I thought he'd be a little bit sharper. Haven't seen that so far tonight. The big surprise for me is Listen, Georgia is still Georgia. When you look at players like Jalen Walker, 3 sacks in the first half, Michael Williams finally looks like he's close to 100%. He has the potential to be a first-round draft choice in 2025, Kasey. So we know that Georgia can bring it defensively. They have a ton of next-level players. The big head-scratcher for me, despite the fact that Georgia's up 15 right now and can close this thing out in the next 9 minutes, what is going on with Carson Beck? I mean, it's been night and day from a year ago. Tons of turnover-worthy plays, a lot of bad decisions, really helped Texas get back in this game a few minutes ago with a pick to Jahdae Barron that he took deep into the red zone. So if Georgia's going to close things out and then continue to contend for an SEC title and possibly another national championship under Kirby Smart, they have to get right offensively. And that really begins with Carson Beck.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that was going to be another question that I just had and needed another brain to pick on it. Because for starters, when you look at his numbers outside of probably the interceptions and whatnot, I mean, he's making 300 plus passing yards, still look easy. But I couldn't figure out earlier, I was talking about it on College Football Today and In Game Live, are we seeing a digression of any sort? Because we're not seeing the consistency along those numbers in play from Carson Beck. And then heading into this matchup, one of the headlines being that Beck's draft stock is kind of falling short. It's starting to move down a little bit because of how these games are translating out. I thought some of it was the panic of putting up or allowing 31 points from Mississippi State, but overall, that's kind of what I'm seeing right now versus Texas. There's just big plays that are being given away, and Texas can capitalize on those. Again, 9+ minutes in football could be quite a long time for a team to get back into any sort of contention, and Carson Beck is kind of at the helm of that when you think of it.
Yeah, listen, I still think he's a day one NFL draft pick. He has the pedigree. He has the SEC experience, size, arm talent is all there. I've heard some people in the first half of the season say, no Ladd McConkey, no Brock Bowers. Those were his security blankets. But again, this is still Georgia. They still have top-tier talent at wide receiver and tight end. Oscar Delp, I think, will play on Sundays. He's now his tight end. I don't think we can go down that road of saying he lost his best playmakers, so we're going to see this level of regression in terms of decision-making. Still has, Kasey, one of the best offensive lines in the country, so that's not an issue. I just think this is a case where possibly overthinking, overanalyzing, making poor reads and poor decisions, that's a surprise to me, because this is a kid with a high IQ, great work ethic, did not expect to see that this season. And oh, by the way, they're finally starting to get more production from the running game tonight out of Trevor Etienne. So balance is not so much of an issue. And I only bring this up because, the draft is a long way away. We'll have a lot of time to talk about that. But Georgia still considers itself, rightfully so, to be a national championship contender. And again, it's going to take more than defense in this crowded field in 2024. You got to bring it from the quarterback position. And over the past month, going back to the Alabama game, too many mistakes out of Carson Beck that has to be addressed.
Absolutely. And a number of weapons still. I mean, sure, they might not be as experienced. They might not be the guys that he originally had familiarity with, but there's still enough there for Carson Beck to cook with, I would like to say. As Rich and I continue to run through this matchup and other ones on this beautiful Saturday, Texas currently with the ball. They're still down by 15, 2nd and 10 on Georgia's 46 is what I'm seeing currently. So Beck is sitting at 175 passing yards, but 3 interceptions is not going to be all that flattering if the result ends in an L. But even if it ends in a W, it's going to cause some conversation. As Rich mentioned also, you got Etienne who's starting to find his game in this offense. 76 yards on the ground through 14 carries and 3 touchdowns to help his team continue to stack points. As for the Texas side of things, it's Golden with the 77 receiving yards through 3 receptions, helping them claw their way back in. I don't know if I can fully say claw their way back in. 7:24 left in the fourth currently as well. Now, kind of switching over to the Texas side of the ball before we go to this break, you mentioned kind of, I don't know, we thought we'd see the rust when it came to Quinn Ewers. We did see that, a bit of a slow start. And then I didn't really expect to see Texas kind of fully try to revert to a run game. I don't know if I love or hate that they came back out with Quinn Ewers. We saw some fun sparks out of Arch Manning. We know he's not afraid to use his legs. We know that he's fine with airing out the ball as well. But what do you think of this decision to continue to roll with Quinn Ewers on the other side of halftime?
I think it's the best move, and I love Arch. I think he's got a great future. I think Texas certainly can win with him behind center. We saw that over the past few weeks when Quinn was out. But who gives you the best chance to win? I think it's the veteran. I think Quinn Ewers has a better grasp of the offense, better chemistry with his receivers and tight ends, Gunnar Helm in particular. It might not seem like it right now based on his play over the past 7 quarters, but I think Quinn Ewers gives him the best shot. And I don't think Sark is ready to have that kind of controversy. Still the top-ranked team in the country. That could change in the next few minutes. But I think you go with the guy that brought you there. That's Quinn Ewers until potentially he proves that he can't lead this offense any longer. I don't think we're anywhere near that point, though, Kasey.
Yeah, and I agreed with it also from a mental standpoint. You don't want to defeat your QB1 like that by saying that we're going to throw it in the hands of the younger guy just because things aren't really getting off to the best start. So he's got to be able to mentally overcome that, not only for himself, but for his team in order to continue to be a leader. But so much more on Georgia versus Texas and the rest of this Saturday slate here on SportsGrid TV. Go anywhere, we'll catch you on the other side of this break.
That kid on the 2-point conversion play was wide open on the right side of the end zone, and the kid threw it about 15 rows over his head.
People crystallized Georgia and Alabama. They put them on the shelf above everyone else, and they're just not there this year. I thought the kid Beck was great on Saturday, but they barely beat Mississippi State, who is porous.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the game starts so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into college football today here on SportsGrid TV. Kasey Hudson hanging out with Rich Cirminello to run you through this Saturday slate. We were discussing the Georgia versus Texas game, and currently I'm seeing still Texas with the ball, but down by 15 points as Georgia stacked 30. We got 6:15 left in the fourth quarter, so potentially maybe not a comeback moment for Texas, but probably a lot to take away from this game. So before we move on from it, or move on for now, Rich, what are some takeaways from this matchup? Obviously, two top teams in the nation. Before we went to the break, you mentioned the fact that this can change the ranking for Texas, falling short by 15-plus points or more. So what's probably your top takeaway from Georgia versus Texas tonight?
It kind of somewhat similar to the Oregon State discussion, which is, Texas gets a little bit exposed tonight. But both of these teams firmly in the mix for the college football playoff. I would say my number one takeaway would be this is still Georgia. And with their backs against the wall, you still have one of the best rosters. I would say one of the 2 or 3, maybe 4 best rosters in the entire country. You've got Kirby Smart, who has won back-to-back national championships. That's an outstanding staff. If your biggest problem right now, if I told you in the preseason that your biggest problem would be the inconsistency of Carson Beck, who at that time was the Heisman Trophy favorite or one of the top favorites, if that's the one biggest problem that you have to fix down the stretch, I think Georgia fans would buy into that because they still have a lot of faith in Beck. The inconsistencies and the turnovers are there. You mentioned in the last segment 3 interceptions tonight. That was very uncharacteristic in the past. Biggest takeaway, Georgia still feels like they're national championship contenders, and they've proved it so far tonight in Austin.
Yeah, and I think what a better response when a lot of alarm bells went off when they allowed Mississippi State to put up 31 points. It just looked like they didn't have much control over a game. It should have been a lockdown game for them, but I mean, the greats got to go through all kind of trials and tribulations, and Georgia did just that. So coming out with this win does answer a number of questions, but the consistency after this potential win will say a lot more. Now, before we start running through the Saturday slate, keep everyone updated on what's currently going on. We've got UCF versus Iowa State. Iowa State currently with the ball. 2nd and 10 on UCF's 35. Now, right now, UCF is up 35-3. As I mentioned previously, 30-15, Georgia continuing to stack on top, but 1st and 10 at their own 19 with the ball, trying to drive and add some points there. Stanford versus SMU. SMU ran away with this game for the most part, 40-10. Stanford with the ball, 4th and 1 at SMU's 36. So those are currently some of the games that are continuing to take stride around the league. Obviously, one of the other big games of the day that was circled on many calendars, I kind of consider it an upset alert because it's just the poetic form and fashion in which this game took place. And, of course, I'm talking about Alabama versus Tennessee. And spread came in close, saying that this was going to be a 3-point game. The total was going a little wild on this one. But most importantly, a lot of people thought that Alabama was going to continue to roll. I was nervous because of a couple things, Rich. My first thing of concern was the fact that Alabama barely escaped South Carolina 27-25 the week prior. Now, Tennessee hasn't had the most flattering performances in the last 2 weeks either, so they were kind of head-to-head on that. But where I more so kind of looked at Alabama differently was the fact that it looked like South Carolina, who's lost a number of players to injury over the past couple of weeks, they did very well at forcing Milroe to the perimeter, taking away any running lanes that he has. And we've seen him be very run-heavy kind of in the first half and start airing out the ball in the second half and rack up those 2+ 100 yards. So it seemed like they did well with kind of seeing what South Carolina did and finding that rhythm in the second half, them being Tennessee coming out on top 24-17. So what did you see in this matchup, and what did you expect heading into this matchup?
Yeah, if you're saying you expected Bama to win this one, I'm with you. I thought Alabama would have their best week in a while. They've owned Tennessee 16 of the last 17. They've won in this long rivalry, but something is missing with Alabama. You know, we've had moments over the past month, Kasey, where it was defense. Over the last couple of weeks, it's been Jalen Milroe in the offense. There's just not a lot of consistency. Too many turnovers from Jalen Milroe. The one difference in this one, Tennessee continues, by the way, to struggle offensively. This has been going on since the Oklahoma game 3 weeks ago. Tennessee just can't score. Dylan Sampson, the running back, is their best weapon. Nico Iamaleava has just, I think I'm guilty of it. A lot of people are. We hyped him a little bit too much in the offseason, forgetting the fact that he's still a redshirt freshman. There's a lot of growth that has to happen there. But the better unit in this one was Tennessee's defense. They made stops, James Pierce in particular off the edge. They made stops when they needed to. And, I didn't think in an era of an expanded 12-team playoff, Kasey, that we'd be talking about Alabama on the outside looking in. But we're close to that point right now. This is a 5-2 football team that has not looked good since the halftime of the Georgia game. Can they get in at 10-2? Maybe, but I think there might be another loss on this schedule. It would be shocking with a 12-team playoff not to have Alabama in there.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of them potentially being on the outside looking in, and it brought me to think, okay, what's down the stretch here for their schedule? just to add to what Rich is saying, you got Missouri versus Alabama. We know Mizzou can kind of be a sneaky team in the mix there. And again, if you're watching film, you're kind of figuring out ways to solve this Alabama team. Something that I'll ask Rich about that we'll get into on the other side of the other break coming up here is the fact that Alabama kind of works against themselves when it comes to some of the penalties. I mean, for crying out loud, they had 73 yards worth of penalties before even going into halftime. That's through 10 penalties, double digits, y'all. So after tonight, or after today, they face Mizzou. Then they have LSU. I'm not too high on LSU, but they have their moments as well, and they obviously don't fall out of a game until that final whistle blows, so you really don't know what to expect when it comes to that kind of matchup. Mercer after that. Oklahoma, they can put up another fight after that, and then you've got Auburn, another team big on turning over the ball, but if Alabama matches their tone, their temperament, and has their own turnovers and massive penalties, you have no idea what to expect out of that game either. So a couple of games that can turn into quick losses for Alabama if they don't solve some of these puzzle pieces, but we'll get into all of that on the other side of this break. Make sure you guys are following SportsGrid over at SportsGrid. That's on X. On Instagram, it's at SportsGrid TV. You can chat with the host. You can chat with all of us to see what our best bets, odds, and lines are for all of the games, for all of the sports, but most importantly, for the loaded Saturday college football that we always have. The guys get the day started. I'm with you throughout the rest of the day, but right now, it's Rich and I that are going to help you close out the night. So that quick break that I mentioned coming up right here. I'll see you guys on the other side.
That kid on the two-point conversion play was wide open on the right side of the end zone, and the kid threw it about 15 rows over his head.
People crystallize Georgia and Alabama. They put them on the shelf above everyone else, and they're just not there this year. I thought the kid Beck was great on Saturday, but they barely beat Mississippi State, who is porous.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into college football today here on SportsGrid TV. Kasey Hudson and Rich Cirminello running you through the Saturday slate. Currently going through the Alabama versus Tennessee matchup. And in case you missed it, y'all, Tennessee comes out on top 24-17. Right before we went to the break, though, talking about Alabama's upcoming schedule and how important it's going to be for them to solve their game from top to bottom, we kind of got to touch more on Tennessee because, as you said it, I totally forget that Iamaleava is a redshirt freshman. So there's a number of times that I'll see him come into games and have a higher expectation. Not to mention also the first 2 weeks of this season, he made it look quite easy. So I think we just started to see the human side of a redshirt freshman trying to figure out what this offense rhythm needs to feel like and look like moving forward. He ended up closing out the day with 194 passing yards, 1 touchdown. There was that crucial interception. It was Sampson on the ground that really helped this team pull through. 139 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, but also Nico's not afraid to use his legs. He ended up running out through the day with 44 yards on the ground, and that is through 9 carries. So there was a number of moments and big runs that he had to keep his team in any sort of contention. So what's your takeaway when it comes to Tennessee's offense? Because you already touched on the fact that their defense pulled through strongly for them, especially coming off the edge there. But from what we saw week 1 and week 2 to what we're seeing now for Tennessee, what's kind of the disconnect there?
A competition more than anything else. You never know. September can be very mysterious. Late August, early September, they're facing teams like Kent State putting up 71 points, and you're like, oh my God, this is another Hendon Hooker, Josh Heupel type offense that's going to lead the country in scoring. And once you got to week 3, week 4 in Oklahoma, Tennessee wins that game, but it was 25-15. And I was like, okay, Oklahoma's got a really good defense led by Brent Venables. But each successive week, including last week against Florida, not a great defense, good defense, not great. They struggled again. So I think we know the identity of this team as they move forward, Kasey, and they make a run at possibly contending for and trying to win the SEC, and it's going to be defense in the running game. You mentioned Dylan Sampson. He's had a great season. I'm a little surprised. Far be it for me to question Josh Heupel, one of the great offensive minds in college football, but a little surprised he hasn't used Nico's legs more. When I watched him in the bowl game last year, that was his breakout moment against Iowa, reminded me of a young Lamar Jackson, just his frame, the length, the leanness, the ability to move so well outside the pocket. As he adapts as a passer, I thought Josh would use him more as a runner, and we haven't seen that this year. I don't know if he's trying to protect him. He's not a very bulky kid. I know he doesn't certainly want to get him injured. So Tennessee, if they move forward, it's going to be defense in the ground game. And now as things start to kind of crystallize in the SEC, Alabama with a couple of losses, Tennessee with just one, Tennessee stays in the hunt, not just for the SEC, but also the playoffs.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point to make. And once again, you answer a question that I just have sitting on top of my head, or we're on the same page with something. I agree. I thought that we saw, I don't remember if it was game 4 or game 5, but earlier in the season, there was one game where we saw Nico go up for like 40-plus rushing yards, and I'm like, wow, this kid is not afraid to use his legs, and he knows how to slide. But then after that, we weren't seeing much of anything, and then I wasn't sure if it was more of a reservation thing, but certain teams that they've gone up against, I feel like they could have used that split decision for him to take off and use his legs, and I feel like that started to kind of accumulate back into this game plan. So I was trying to find it to be more specific while you were talking. I will find it just to make the case, because versus Oklahoma, I mean, it was only 15 rushing yards, but there was one where I saw it and I was like, okay, I want to hit these props for him. And then I think it was just over 20 rushing yards, and he didn't get anywhere close to it. I didn't even see him try to take off for any running plays. So I think that they can lean on his versatility a little bit more, not look at him like he's so much as a fragile doll there. But a conversation that will start now. We only got a minute left before we come to our next break. But when it comes to Alabama and then potentially looking on the outside in, what do you think that this potentially does to the Heisman conversation for Jalen Milroe? He's still putting up amazing numbers, but that dual threat that he's known to be, wasn't a big run game for him today. It was more of a passing game. Is that going to kind of drop him down the charts a bit?
Yeah, I think it's over. I don't think there's wise money to be put on Jalen Milroe right now. He just hasn't looked good enough. Too many turnovers. I don't think there are going to be enough huge games. The biggest games on the schedule for Alabama are now in the rearview mirror. So I think he's out of the running right now. We're starting to see some kids move higher to the top, like Cam Ward, who I'd like to talk about on the back end of this break.
Absolutely, and Ward is worth every conversation. So we'll talk some Heisman as well as these other big games of the day. Don't go anywhere. Stick with us here on SportsGrid TV.
That kid on the two-point conversion play was wide open on the right side of the end zone, and the kid threw it about 15 rows over his head.
People crystallize Georgia and Alabama. They put them on the shelf above everyone else, and they're just not there this year. I thought the kid Beck was great on Saturday, but they barely beat Mississippi State, who is porous.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Back at it with college football today here on SportsGrid TV. Kasey and Rich running through the Saturday slate. Now, right before we went to that break, we were talking about what the Heisman conversation now looks like around Jalen Milroe. And Rich was mentioning the fact that he's probably no longer in this conversation. So before we pivot to the guy sitting on the top of the charts for the Heisman Trophy potential candidate, I have to say that, Rich, you're 100% correct, because from where we saw him even a week ago, you've got Jalen Milroe sitting at plus 4,000 to potentially even talk about a Heisman Trophy winner. So a lot of guys jumping ahead of him, including Nussmeier for LSU. You're seeing Indiana's guy ahead of him. You're seeing Penn State's guy ahead of him. You're seeing a number of players that we probably wouldn't have been talking about nearly even 2-3 weeks ago, including Boise State's Aston Yenti. So talk to me about the top guy on the chart here, Cameron Ward, as we get ready to match up what went down between Miami and Louisville. He's currently sitting at plus 230 odds. Do we start with the consistency we've seen out of him? Do we start with how he climbed the charts here? What has impressed you most when it comes to Cameron Ward?
More than anything else, Kasey, it's clutch. Listen, I think he's going to be a very good NFL quarterback. I love the way he operates outside the pocket. He throws on the move, makes great decisions, super smart kid. There's so much to like about him. He still plays with a chip on his shoulder. This is a kid who had no D1 offers coming out of high school, started at the FCS level, transfers to Washington State. Now he's on a much bigger stage at Miami, where the Hurricanes are top 10 and undefeated. But they've played a lot of close games. Today was another good example, 52-45. They go toe-to-toe with Tyler Shuck in Louisville. And every time Miami needed a big play, a big drive, this kid comes through. He's so poised. He's so clutch, throws a beautiful ball. I think he's the front runner right now. The one knock on Cam Ward, to me, looking through the eyes of Heisman voters, this is not my vote, I don't know if there's that Heisman moment, that marquee game. You know, we've seen some monster games. We've got some big ones coming up like Penn State, Ohio State. Miami doesn't have that. This is one of the biggest games left on the schedule was today against Louisville, and there's not a lot of sex appeal when it comes to Louisville. in terms of college football. Clemson's not on the regular season schedule. So I think if there's going to be a knock on Ward, it won't be numbers. It won't be his impact on a top 10 team. It's just, have you seen enough against bigger programs? And then really the same thing's going to apply to Ashton Genty. I mean, he's been phenomenal. The numbers are great. The film is sensational. But can you build a Heisman campaign against largely Mountain West competition? That's what voters are going to grapple with over the next month.
That's actually a tremendous point, because when you think about it, I feel like that's why where conferences stack becomes such an important topic of conversation. Some people don't feel like the ACC is that competitive, at least not anymore. And with teams like FSU falling short this season, with teams like, Clemson competing against middle of the pack teams as well, I feel like the stock in the ACC is kind of dropped as a whole this coming year, which might affect Miami, what they've been able to do, and the games that they've been able to pull off. Now, with that in mind, do you think that the ACC is as weak as it's kind of perceived to be right now? We've had a lot of movement with the Big 12 and the Big 10 and all these other conferences that have gotten some new playmakers into the mix. Is the ACC kind of the weaker of all of the conferences?
It is. I mean, the fan in me, much like the Big 12, I love these conferences because there's parity, there's competitiveness. We have some really fun storylines like Pitt being undefeated, SMU's a one-loss team. I love that. There's competitive balance. But you brought up an excellent point that I want to echo, which is Florida State, because Miami plays the Seminoles next weekend. And from a Heisman perspective in Cam Ward, normally you would think defending two-time ACC champ, regular season perfection last year before Jordan Travis goes out. Oh, this is going to be a monster game for Cam Ward, but it's not. I mean, Florida State's 1-6. They just lost to Duke on Friday night. Blue Devils, by the way, 6-1. So, it's a fun conference. It's a competitive conference. But if you're looking for a Heisman Trophy, if you want to make a national splash for the biggest award in the sport, the ACC is just not the place to do it right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, you got to go against some Titans in order to get that recognition, and the ACC doesn't really have any of them. Also, to add, FSU falling short and breaking their perfect record of 22-0 versus Duke. That is just unfortunate. And as a gal who has watched hundreds of FSU games, it's been a brutal season for your friend Kasey Hudson here. But before we move on from Cam Ward and company, 319 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. Martinez on the ground, 89 rushing yards through 12 carries, 1 touchdown. And then it was Samuel Brown through the air, 125 receiving yards. You guys, that's through 3 receptions. So it just comes back to what Rich said, being clutch. It's his composure that I love, because no matter what's going on, I mean, Louisville had an answer for every time Miami got on the board. They were tied up 38-38. They just continued to stay on Miami's heels, but you don't see Cam Ward blink whatsoever. You just see him find a target or create a target and get the job done. So Miami comes out on top 52-45 to just continue to roll when it comes to their record, their performance, and their consistency. That's what it all comes down to. Before we move on to another top game of the day, we got a final in the books here between Iowa State and UCF. UCF not able to hold on to that lead there. Iowa State comes away with this one 38-35. Another final in the books is Georgia versus Texas, and Georgia was able to hold Texas off from some of the momentum swings they were picking up on. 30-15 is the close on that one. A game that I want to pivot to for just a second here is going to be Notre Dame versus Georgia Tech. The reason I wanted to cue in on this one for a second is the fact that Georgia Tech actually has a pretty decent run-stop defense, but we were able to see Notre Dame adjust their game, get a 200-plus yard performance out of Riley Leonard, who typically doesn't have to put up 200-plus yards. He sits around 160 and then goes to work on the ground the rest of the way. We've seen 50 to 100 rushing yards for Leonard look so easy. They got Jadainian Price involved in the run game as well, not heavily relying on Love because they didn't want to make it too obvious. So with their ability to kind of adjust things, they didn't only just get away with the win on this one, 31-13, but I feel like they made it count and they showed that they were able to play great football. Did you get that same takeaway from the Fighting Irish extending their winning streak from 4 to 5 today?
I did. I thought this was a potential landmine game. Georgia Tech, without their starting quarterback, had to go to Zach Pyron. He's a veteran, but nowhere near what you're looking for in a passing quarterback. So ND got a break there. But listen, I've been impressed by what Marcus Freeman has been able to do in South Bend, because it wasn't that long ago, week 2, in fact, that Notre Dame got stunned by Northern Illinois out of the MAC. And at that point, you had to kind of scratch your head and say, is this really a playoff team? Which we thought they would be in the preseason. But little by little, they've built around Riley Leonard. Tremendous defense. I thought they did a good job out of the secondary. Benjamin Morrison, not just their best cornerback, but one of the 2 or 3 best cornerbacks in the entire country when it comes to NFL draft grades. Done for the season with a hip injury. He did not play in this game. He was replaced by Leonard Moore, true freshman, who could be Benjamin Morrison 2.0. And by the way, in terms of cornerbacks, Kasey, Will Johnson of Michigan also left the Illinois game. So the top 2 corners in terms of NFL potential, Benjamin Morrison done for the year. We'll see what happens with Will Johnson, but both of those kids injured. Bottom line, though, for me is Notre Dame is just kind of piecing things together with 2 massive games remaining against none other than Army and Navy, both of whom are undefeated still 7 weeks through the season.
Yeah, I cannot wait to see how those 2 games shake out. But you said it. Week 1 was kind of a narrow escape. Week 2 was like, where's this going to go from here? And week 3 was the Fighting Irish answering with nothing better than just more fight. And they continue to add that week in and week out. So we'll see what shakes out in the upcoming week. But we got a few more games to get to here, especially an upset. So don't go anywhere. Continue to hang with us on the other side of this break here on SportsGrid.
That kid on the 2-point conversion play was wide open on the right side of the end zone, and the kid threw it about 15 rows over his head.
People crystallized Georgia and Alabama. They put them on the shelf above everyone else, and they're just not there this year. I thought the kid Beck was great on Saturday, but they barely beat Mississippi State, who is porous.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Welcome back into college football. Today here on SportsGrid TV, Kasey Hudson and Rich Cirminello going through the Saturday slate. In case you missed it before we went to the break, we were talking about the Fighting Irish continuing their win streak, extending from 4 to 5, but some good competition coming up ahead between Army and Navy, and we'll see who comes out on top. Now, a game that fell to disappointment. Not that many people had one direction or another, because I know we've seen a lot of inconsistency out of this team. Speaking of some inconsistent teams, but Michigan falls to Illinois 21-7. Illinois comes out on top. This was disappointing for a number of reasons. We've seen glimmers of a strong defense. Maybe strong is a strong word. We've seen glimmers of a decent defense out of Michigan. We thought that they found a rhythm once they got past Warren, but having the running quarterback didn't solve the puzzle piece that was and now is. What is this offense supposed to look like? Then they come into this matchup, they switch out their quarterback yet again, so the carousel continues, and they're just unable to get any sort of offense going. They do pick up 7 points, but outside of that, I mean, Illinois is very much in control of this game. What did you see in this one, and what can we expect from Michigan going down the stretch here, because it's just not looking good?
No, listen, I think Michigan's got 1 foot in 2025 already. They have some elite players on defense. I mentioned Will Johnson in the last segment, Mason Graham up front, Kenneth Grant up front, Josiah Stewart, the Coastal Carolina transfer, is having a fantastic season off the edge. But Michigan is, over the past few years under Jim Harbaugh, has been accustomed to playing for Indianapolis in a Big Ten title game appearance. Last year, national championship. Under Sharon Moore this year, honestly, that entire program has been a disappointment in the offseason. I've said it before, and I'll harp on it. In the era of the transfer portal, when you see teams like Indiana going to the Ohio Bobcats and getting Curtis Rourke and re-energizing their entire program, it's been happening throughout the country. Diego Pavia, all right, New Mexico State winds up at Vandy, and now Vandy's 5-2. Michigan, it's negligent to me that when they saw what they had on the roster returning at quarterback, they did not go out and get a veteran who could at least compete for playing time. It's been a miserable situation at quarterback. It has hurt the ground game, which has been so good for so long. They don't have any balance. So, Michigan is going to be a non-factor down the stretch. They might be a 6-6 team when all is said and done. But for me, the storyline here, Case, is Illinois and Brett Bielema. He's done it before. Wisconsin most notably, but at times at Arkansas as well. This guy just knows how to coach defenses, offensive lines, and he's getting a great season by Luke Altmaier. Talk about transfer quarterbacks. Illinois went out and got Altmaier from Ole Miss. He wasn't able to win the job over Jackson Dart. And Altmaier, before today, I'd have to look at today's box score, but before today, 14 touchdown passes, just 1 interception, making plays with his legs. And Illinois is another one of the Big Ten teams, along with Indiana, that's been a really big surprise so far this fall.
Absolutely. And something to just add to that when it comes to Illinois, the efficiency is there because they're not forcing any plays. And we see that out of a number of teams. But, Altmaier was able to come out of this one only aiding passing yards, 1 touchdown, but no interceptions, no turnovers there. And then resorts to his legs with 48 yards on the ground through 10 carries and was able to run in a touchdown for his team. So that's what having a game plan looks like in comparison to Michigan. And when you go into a matchup like this, it just illuminates the fact that Michigan doesn't seem like they had a game plan coming into this. And I'm glad that you mentioned the fact that they kind of didn't take advantage of getting ahead of what was going to be the hole when it came to the quarterback topic. The 3 quarterbacks they have, there's no synchronicity between their play. And so for a minute, maybe they thought they had something behind having 3 different kinds of quarterbacks. But then how do you run a cohesive, rhythmic offense when you just have different pieces to plug in that can't get anything going? So it's pretty remiss of them to not be able to get anything shaking. And Michigan fans, I think Rich said it, 1 foot in 2025. Maybe it's time to start looking ahead. Now, we kind of touched on this team ever so slightly because we mentioned the fact that Alabama is going to have to face them soon. You got LSU that took on Arkansas. 34-10 is the victory for the LSU Tigers. Now, one thing that I do want to highlight from this conversation as well as get your opinion on, Rich, is that Nussmeier, who I mentioned earlier, he's climbing the rankings when it comes to the Heisman conversation. He's now sitting as the 6th guy in this competition to be looked at to potentially take home the Heisman Trophy. So first and foremost, we've seen a lot of shaky performances out of LSU, but what we also have seen is a team that never gives up. So what did you make of this game? What have you made of LSU so far this season? And what have you made of their quarterback, Garrett Nussmeier?
Yeah, we might have differing opinions, Kasey, because I have been very impressed by LSU. Not to the extent of, Texas before tonight or Oregon and their win over Ohio State. It is a flawed program. There's no question about it. But Brian Kelly, who is a top 10 coach in the country, is doing one of his best jobs in years, because this isn't Joe Burrow's LSU. There's not that much talent on this roster. And defensively, they lost Harold Perkins, who is easily their best defensive player. And in his wake, Braden Swinson has stepped up on the edge. Whit Weeks leads the SEC, their linebacker, in tackles. And I'm increasingly a big fan of Garrett Nussmeier. Take a look at mock drafts. He's sneaking up into the top 10. I've seen the New York Giants, the local team around here, possibly taking Nussmeier to replace Daniel Jones at quarterback. So, it's not the best roster LSU has ever had, but they've reeled off 6 consecutive wins. It's a pretty good Arkansas team that was in Fayetteville. 34-10 was the final. So, can LSU win a national championship with this roster? I don't think so, but I think they've overachieved since that opening night loss against USC.
I will have to give you that one, Rich. For the most part, I could still be stuck on everything that happened in the South Carolina game because things just looked really messy. But you point out a crucial thing that I have not taken into consideration. The guys that Nussmeier has to air the ball out to, the guys that Nussmeier has to rely on to get this offense going. And probably that's where it comes in stronger as to who he's been as a leader and who he's been as a quarterback. They did fall short with some of their own injuries in that particular battle, as well as versus USC. So something for me to consider moving forward. But after I saw the Gamecocks almost take that game from them, I just wasn't sure what to expect from LSU and if they would be continue to compete. But they're doing it. So we'll get to this and so much more. We've got another quick break here on SportsGrid TV. Don't go anywhere. Join us on the other side of this quick break.
That kid on the two-point conversion play was wide open on the right side of the end zone, and the kid threw it about 15 rows over his head.
People crystallized Georgia and Alabama. They put them on the shelf above everyone else, and they're just not there this year. I thought the kid Beck was great on Saturday, but they barely beat Mississippi State, who is porous.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Anyone that's been to a sporting event, the atmosphere before a game, I think Game Time Decisions has that same exact atmosphere. This is our arena. This is what we do. There is going to be an energy to Game Time Decisions that you will feel night in and night out. The excitement you get when you lock your bets in, when you're figuring out what you want to do, we can zone in on the biggest games each night. I want this to be the place that people come to before the games start so they feel as ready as possible to lock in their cards. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions to get that new information, react to it, and be able to then bet accordingly. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
One more rally here on college football today. Kasey Hudson with Rich Cirminello getting ready to close out the night. But what a Saturday. What a amount of college football games that we have had to get to. Again, upsets, big wins, conference winners coming out on top and getting their eye on the prize when it comes to the national championship that is not too far away. But we were talking about LSU, and I love that Rich pointed out that, Nussmeier is a quarterback worth keeping an eye on, and not to mention, don't compare it to the previous eras that LSU has produced. So I may have been a little bit blinded there, and I appreciate the attention drawn to it. Now, another headline that circulated quite a bit, and I've heard a number of things. First, people weren't sure where was USC going to go without their star quarterback anymore. So everyone hyper-focused on the quarterback situation and where's the offense going to go without that star quarterback. But the larger conversation when it comes to USC, and you mentioned it, it's the fourth quarter. It's the fourth quarter inefficiency, I must say. After looking like they were potentially going to add a W to their column today, they fall short to Maryland, 29-28. I'm talking about Maryland picking up 15 points in the fourth quarter after USC had 7 points in the first, shutting out Maryland from picking up any points, 14 points in the second quarter, allowing only one touchdown, not putting any points on the board in the third quarter, and Maryland to get in the driver's seat for that fourth quarter. We've seen 4+ teams in the fourth quarter get into the driver's seat over USC. So where do we start pointing the fingers here? Because it's not on the quarterback, Rich. I think we can agree on that.
No, I think Miller Moss, the successor to Caleb Williams, who you were referencing, has been fine. I mean, I think he's played fine enough for USC to not be 3-4 right now. This is, to me, all about coaching. You touched on the fourth quarter collapses today against Maryland, last week against Penn State, the week before that, Minnesota, same script at Minnesota. And then their loss to Michigan, they were ready to pull the road upset in Ann Arbor and then blew that game as well. So this to me is about coaching. USC has too much tradition, too many expectations, too much raw talent to be 3-4 right now. And with 5 games left, a program like USC, I think Lincoln Riley's going to have a hard time keeping these kids motivated down the stretch. The thought going in was USC was ranked in the preseason. USC believed they had a shot to be a playoff contender. Now they're playing for a second or third tier bowl game. So, this is not, by the way, Kasey, I'm not making any kind of hot seat proclamations at all. USC likes Lincoln Riley. That's their guy. But, man, he has got to raise the bar. 11 wins 2 years ago, just 8 last year. This year looks like he could be 6-6? So he is regressing. His inability to win close games is starting to remind me of Scott Frost at Nebraska. I'll bring it back to UCF, former UCF coach Scott Frost. So we'll bring in some UCF ties here for you as well. You got to be able to win close games, and he just hasn't been able to do that. Of course, the players, deserve some criticism for that, but this is coaching. You can't keep collapsing in fourth quarters and still be considered a great coach. And Lincoln Riley has a lot of work to do over the next month and a half.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to clarify, it's definitely not you putting him in the hot seat. It's all the headlines putting him in the hot seat, because now USC has to find some answers to the questions that is the fourth quarter problem for them. But a little PTSD there mentioning Scott Frost. I know he did good things for UCF and then ended up in Nebraska, and there was the whole hometown story, and it did not work out. But you know what I did not love about Coach Frost? I'm sorry, here's a hot seat and a hot take. He went too fast and too quickly to the hybrid tight end conversation. He started taking guys that were oversized wide receivers, and it worked in UCF. But if you look at how many guys became NFL potentials out of UCF and just kind of collapsed after the fact, you can't do that in college football if you want to set these guys up for a career. And it was a hard thing to watch for a number of good humans that I know over at UCF. So Scott Frost, yeah, that was the one little bone that I had to pick with him. I feel like we'd be remiss not to touch on it, or at least give it some celebration before we close out the night, Rich. But Indiana, 56 points on Nebraska, only letting up 7. And I just loved the interviews after that game. The coach's dad was a great coach. I mean, when you come from a coaching family, you just want to have your own success story, and he's wielding a pretty big sword when it comes to Indiana and what they could potentially produce this season.
Listen, I'll wrap by just saying Indiana's a microcosm for where we're at in college football. There is no more rebuilding. With the transfer portal, you can build on the fly. That's exactly what Curt Cignetti has done in his first season in Bloomington.
That's a beautiful way to wrap things up here tonight. Once again, make sure you're following everyone over on X and following SportsGrid at SportsGrid. That's a wrap for Rick and myself here tonight. I hope everybody had a wonderful college football Saturday, and we'll continue coverage here on SportsGrid tomorrow.